So this is Carl Moore talking management for the Globe and Mail. This morning I'm talking to Calin Rovinescu, who's the CEO of, as of April 1st this year, of Air Canada. Prior to that, Calin was a managing partner at Stikeman Elliott, a leading law firm, and a founding partner at Genuity, but rejoined Air Canada after 5 or 6 years absence as CEO, as I mentioned, on April 1st. So good morning, Calin.
Good morning, Carl.
One question that people have talked about is that Robert Milton led the way in carving off part of Air Canada, what used to be Air Canada Aeroplan now, and Jazz and so on. And some people have said, well, wait a minute, what you guys did was you took away some of the more profitable parts, spun them off in their own companies, but that cost Air Canada part of its future. How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, I'd say when ACE was created, ACE Aviation was the holding company created coming out of the restructuring just around the time that I left. And ACE effectively paid Air Canada for those assets, and it paid them market value. It paid something in the order of $2.2 billion for Aeroplan, Jazz, and ACTS, as it then was, Avios. That market value today is something like $1.7 billion, I believe. So in fact, the value that it received at the time, Air Canada received at the time, was higher than the value of those assets today. In addition, Air Canada then took the money and purchased 777 aircraft, purchased the Embraer fleet. How is it that Air Canada could possibly have refleeted itself in an environment coming out of bankruptcy? So this gave it an opportunity to refleet itself and as well to make these massive improvements to the existing fleet by putting the audio and video equipment on the back of each seat, effectively refurbish the entire fleet, massive cost, contribute something like 1.7 or 1.8 billion to the pension plan. So these were all things that, that having had access to that capital allowed Air Canada effectively to become a more competitive airline. So that was the quid pro quo, if you like, for the for those assets. ACE subsequently took those assets, and when the markets were at a height, it in turn distributed it to the public and made a profit for its shareholders.
So really, what effectively did it, you managed to create a lot of capital that Air Canada could really poise itself for the future.
That is correct.
What you did.
And that is correct. And so you took some assets that were monetized at higher values by the market outside an airline, while at the same time the airline received lots of liquidity to position itself better for the future. Now, subsequently, obviously, we're now facing the recession, and we faced last year's high fuel price resulted in some fuel hedges, etc. So, we've had other challenges since the ACE transactions, but I would say that is the glass half empty or half full? That's in the eyes of the beholder.
Calin, you've been taking a lot of capacity out of Air Canada's network in the last few months. Are you trying to shrink the airline to profitability?
Our view on that is we need to manage capacity effectively. So we've taken out capacity tactically in some areas where we thought it made sense. But in an airline like Air Canada, a legacy structure, it's my view, very, very strongly held view, that you cannot shrink the airline to profitability. We had an analyst who had suggested maybe we ought to shrink the airline by half. And in this environment, that just is absolutely not on. I mean, that will not happen. It is impossible with a high cost structure to do that. So, instead of looking at the negativity of saying we're going to become smaller and smaller and smaller and have more layoffs, my expectation is to find creative route opportunities, to find new markets, to find additional areas where we can deploy capacity. So there will be times where we'll shrink for sure, but we're not looking at massive shrinkage. We're not looking at reducing the airline by half and having massive layoffs.
Air Canada is a legacy carrier. Partly it went back to the government, but some people think that Air Canada is flying a lot of routes which are unprofitable and they should cut.
We look at every single route is looked at from a profitability perspective. Sometimes you have to invest in a route for some period of time before it generates a profit. And we've looked at one route recently to Europe. We've almost taken it out a couple of times, and all of a sudden, guess what? It started to turn around, and it looks very, very profitable. So these are not things, this is not like selling shoes where you can determine how many pairs of shoes you sell in a week or a month or a year as to whether it's a good business. You have to, once you decide on a market, you have to stick with it sufficiently to determine whether or not it's a profitable route.
But on occasion, you'll cut it off when you come to the conclusion long term it's still not viable.
Categorically, absolutely, yes. We would cut it off, and we have no difficulty doing that. And you will see some routes abandoned where we don't think there's a prospect of making enough money, or where the yields have become so low. We like to say that we can match WestJet. We can match another competition. But if the yields have become so low in some markets where we don't see the prospects, we'll exit those markets. Just act responsibly.
So you view Roots as a business person, not as someone who's got to carry the Canadian flag around the country?
No, that's correct. We had that discussion with previous governments, and our objective is to run a profitable business for our employees and our shareholders.
This has been Carl Moore talking today to the new CEO of Air Canada. Thanks for your time, Calin.
Thank you.